At 7:15 in the evening, my daughter-in-law Courtney handed me a crumpled piece of paper in front of 300 guests. She tapped the microphone, drawing every eye in the room to our table, and announced that Mark and I, the uneducated in-laws, had prepared a surprise poem in French. The room fell silent. Courtney leaned in, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "Just make random sounds," she whispered. "It is a comedy bit. Nobody expects you people to get it right." My eyes scanned the note. It was phonetic gibberish. It was a trap designed to turn us into court jesters for her high society friends. I stared at the paper. Then I shifted my gaze to the microphone. Before I tell you how we wiped that smirk off her face, drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is standing with us today. I did not blink. I did not search the room for my son, hoping he would jump in to save his poor, uneducated mother from embarrassment. I refused to give Courtney the satisfaction of seeing a single bead of sweat. Instead, I turned my head slowly to the left and locked eyes with my husband, Mark. We have been partners in life and business for 34 years. We do not need words to communicate. In the boardroom, a tap of a pen means walk away. At a negotiation table, a shifted tie means go for the throat. Tonight, the look was simpler. It was a slight narrowing of the eyes. It was a signal. Green light. I turned back to the microphone. The room was buzzing with that cruel, high-frequency energy you only find when a group of insecure people smell blood. They were waiting for the stutter. They were waiting for the apologies. They were waiting for the shucks. We aren't fancy folk routine that Courtney had scripted for us in her head. I lifted the crumpled piece of paper she had handed me. I held it up so the light from the chandeliers caught the cheap notebook texture. Then, slowly, deliberately, I crushed it. I squeezed my hand into a fist until the paper was nothing but a tight, white ball. The microphone was sensitive. It picked up the sound of the paper crunching, amplifying it until it sounded like a bone snapping in a quiet room. The snickering in the back row stopped instantly. I opened my hand and let the ball drop. It hit the floor with a soft thud that somehow felt louder than a shout. Courtney's smile faltered. Just for a second. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, like a glitch in a computer program. She had calculated every variable of this wedding. She had chosen the flowers, the music, the seating chart, and the victims. But she had made a critical error in her data. She assumed that silence was the same thing as submission. I adjusted the microphone stand. It let out a sharp, high-pitched feedback squeal. A few guests in the front row winced and covered their ears. Good. I wanted them uncomfortable. I wanted them awake. I looked out at the crowd. We were at the Chateau Dumont, one of the most exclusive, members-only vineyards in Napa Valley. The air here smelled of old oak, fermentation, and money. It was the kind of place designed to make people like Mark and me feel small. Courtney had spent the last 12 months pretending she belonged here. She had invited her colleagues from her high-fashion PR firm. She had invited her boss, Mr. DuPont, people who wore designer logos like armor and treated waitstaff like furniture. She looked at Mark in his off-the-rack gray suit. She looked at me in my navy dress that had no label stitched into the collar. She saw static. She saw two simple people who were lucky to be allowed in the building. She thought the crystal glasses and the 7-course meal intimidated us. She didn't realize that intimidation is a transaction, and we weren't buying. Inside my chest, the mother-in-law was quietly stepping aside. Violet, the housewife, the woman who baked cookies and kept her opinions to herself to keep the peace, had left the building. In her place stood the CEO. The anger I felt wasn't hot or messy. It was cold. It was the calculated precision of a shipping manifest that doesn't add up. Courtney had treated our patience like a limitless line of credit. She had spent our kindness like it was a currency that would never devalue. But as I took a breath and prepared to speak, I knew one thing for certain. The line of credit was closed, and the bill was due immediately. To understand why I stood there with a crumpled ball of paper at my feet, you have to understand the economics of our family. I do not mean our bank accounts. I mean the currency of respect. For the last 3 years, Courtney has operated on a very specific misunderstanding of the world. It is what Mark calls the status paradox. To a woman like Courtney, if you have money, you scream it. You wear it on your handbag, you drive it in a leased convertible, and you post it on social media. If you are quiet, if you drive a 5-year-old sedan and wear unbranded cotton shirts, you must be poor. You must be irrelevant. She is what we call a loud signaler. She spends money she does not have to impress people she does not like. Her entire personality is a billboard advertising, a lifestyle she is barely financing with maxed-out credit cards. Mark and I? We are the silent sacrificers. Courtney looks at us and sees 2 high school dropouts who got lucky enough to scrape by. She thinks we live in a modest house because that is all we can afford. She thinks Brandon, my son, is the only success story in the bloodline because he went to Yale. She does not know the ledger. She does not know that when Brandon got his acceptance letter to Yale, Mark and I did not apply for financial aid. We did not ask him to take out student loans. We went to the bank and wired $240,000 in a single afternoon. We paid for his entire Ivy League education with the same casual ease that most people buy a used car. We never told Brandon the money came from us. We told him he got a scholarship. We wanted him to walk onto that campus feeling proud of his brain, not his parents' checkbook. She does not know about our house, the one she rolls her eyes at when she visits for holidays. She once told her friends on speakerphone that it was quaint and wondered how we managed the rent. We do not pay rent. We bought that estate 7 years ago for $1.8 million. Cash? It sits on 6 acres of prime real estate, paid for by the logistics company Mark built from a single delivery van into a fleet of 500 trucks moving freight across 3 continents. We never corrected her. We never flashed a bank statement or corrected her when she made snide comments about our simple lives. We stayed silent for a reason. We wanted to see who she really was. We wanted to know if she loved Brandon for his heart or for the safety net she assumed he had. We wanted to see if she would treat us with dignity simply because we were human beings, or if her respect had a price of admission. We got our answer. Courtney mistook our silence for emptiness. She looked at our lack of logos and assumed a lack of power. She didn't understand that the loudest person in the room is usually the most insecure. A lion does not need to roar to prove it is a lion. It just is. By keeping our mouths shut, we had given her enough rope to hang herself. And tonight, standing on this stage, she had finally kicked away the chair. She thought she was exposing our ignorance. In reality, she was about to expose the depth of her own miscalculation. I glanced at Mark again. He gave a microscopic nod. It was time to open the books. To understand the sheer malice of the moment, you have to rewind the clock exactly 24 hours. We were at the rehearsal dinner. It was held at a French bistro that served portions so small you needed a magnifying glass to find the protein. The atmosphere was tense. Courtney was vibrating with stress, snapping at waiters and rearranging place settings that were already perfectly aligned. The first warning shot happened at the table. Mark was holding the wine list, quietly studying the vintage selection. He enjoys wine. He knows the difference between a Bordeaux and a Burgundy. Not because he is pretentious, but because he is curious. He reads encyclopedias the way other men read sports pages. Courtney reached across the table and snatched the leather-bound menu out of his hands. She didn't ask for it. She just took it, like you would take a sharp object away from a toddler. "Oh, Mark, don't worry about that," she said, her voice loud enough for her friends to hear. "I will order for the table. The names are all in French. And I don't want you to hurt your brain trying to pronounce Pinot Noir." Her friends giggled. Mark didn't say a word. He just folded his hands on the tablecloth and gave her a look of mild amusement. But I felt the heat rising in my neck. She treated my husband, a man who taught himself supply chain logistics and built a $50 million empire from scratch, like a golden retriever that had accidentally wandered into a library. But the real knife in the back came 10 minutes later. I went to the corridor to find the restroom. Courtney followed me. She cornered me near the coat check, checking her makeup in a hallway mirror. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "Violet," she said, using my name like it was an unpleasant taste in her mouth. "My boss, Mr. DuPont, is flying in tomorrow. He is a very sophisticated man. He is from Paris. That is nice, I said. She turned to face me. I need you and Mark to stay away from him. I don't want you embarrassing me with truck stop stories or recipes for tater tot casserole. Just keep your distance, okay? I stayed silent. I was too stunned to respond. It really is a miracle Brandon turned out so refined, she continued, applying a fresh coat of lipstick. I guess it is true what they say about genetics. Sometimes a black hen lays a white egg. A black hen. That was what she saw when she looked at me. Dirty, common, useful for laying eggs, but not fit for the dinner table. And one more thing, she said, flashing a bright, fake smile. It is a tradition in Mr. Dupont's family to have a French reading at weddings. I told everyone you and Mark volunteered. It will be a fun little surprise. We don't speak French, Courtney, I said calmly. I know that, she laughed. That is the point. It is funny, it shows you are humble. I will write it out phonetically for you. Just read the sounds. Everyone will get a kick out of it. My son Brandon walked up then. He looked tired. What is going on? Nothing, Courtney chirped, hooking her arm through his. Just asking your parents to do a cute little reading tomorrow. It is a surprise. Mom doesn't speak French, Brandon said. It is just for fun, babe. Don't be such a killjoy. It is entertainment. She dragged him back to the dining room before he could argue. I stood in the hallway alone. I realized then that this wasn't about tradition. It wasn't about entertainment. It was an assassination attempt. She wanted to put us on stage, make us stumble through a language she thought we didn't understand, and present us to her boss as the uneducated clowns she had graciously allowed into her life. She wanted to use our humiliation to elevate her own status. She wanted a show. Standing at the microphone 24 hours later, looking at her terrified face, I decided to give her exactly what she asked for. I took a deep breath. I looked past Courtney's frozen smile and locked eyes directly with Mr. Dupont, the guest of honor. Then, I opened my mouth. I did not make the animal noises Courtney had scribbled on that piece of paper. I did not stutter. I spoke in flawless, aristocratic Parisian French. The kind of French you do not learn on an app. The kind you learn during 30 years of negotiating shipping contracts in the boardrooms of Lyon and Marseille. Monsieur Dupont, I said, my voice ringing clear and steady through the speakers. It is a pleasure to finally welcome you properly. I apologize for the confusion earlier. My daughter-in-law was under the impression that intelligence is a gift, reserved only for those with diplomas on their walls. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Courtney's face went white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish that had just been pulled out of the water and slapped onto a dock. I switched seamlessly back to English, translating my own words for the benefit of the American guests. I wanted to make sure nobody missed a syllable. For those of you who don't speak the language, I said, my tone conversational and cool, I was just explaining to Mr. Dupont that in our family, we believe education is a lifelong pursuit, not a 4-year vacation paid for by your parents. I saw Mr. Dupont's eyebrows shoot up. He wasn't offended, he was delighted. He leaned forward, a smile spreading across his face. Mark stood up then. He buttoned his jacket with that slow, deliberate calm that usually precedes a hostile takeover. He looked at the German delegation sitting at table 4, Courtney's colleagues from the Berlin office. Guten Abend, Mark said, his baritone voice filling the room. He spoke in German, crisp and authoritative. I hope the wine meets your standards. It is a 2015 vintage, though I believe the tannins are a bit aggressive for this time of year. Then, without missing a beat, he turned to the investors from Shanghai at table 6 and offered a traditional toast in perfect Mandarin. Courtney was vibrating. She was gripping the edge of the head table so hard her knuckles were white. She looked at us, then at her guests, then back at us. Her reality was fracturing. The narrative she had built, the one where she was the princess and we were the peasants, was dissolving in real time. I wasn't done. I walked over to the head table. There was a bottle of wine sitting in front of Courtney. It was the bottle she had ordered for Mark the night before, the one she claimed was too difficult for him to pronounce. I picked it up. "You know, Courtney," I said into the microphone, my voice soft but amplified to every corner of the room. "There is a concept in psychology called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It suggests that people with very low ability at a task tend to overestimate their ability. They don't know enough to know how much they don't know." I turned the bottle so the label faced the crowd. "Last night, you made a big show of ordering this for Mark because you didn't think he could read the label. You called it a Chateauneuf du Pape." I paused. I let the silence stretch. "But you pronounced it with a hard T. In the region where this is grown, a region Mark and I visit twice a year to inspect our supply chain, the T is silent. It is a common mistake for tourists, or for people who confuse a high price tag with high culture." I set the bottle back down. It clicked against the table. "You spent so much time worrying that we would embarrass you with our ignorance," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "You never stopped to ask if you were embarrassing yourself with your arrogance." The room remained deadly silent. But it wasn't the awkward silence of a bad joke anymore. It was the terrified reverence of a room that realizes the king has just walked in and found someone sitting on his throne. Courtney tried to laugh. It was a brittle, jagged sound that cracked through the silence of the room. She clapped her hands together, desperate to regain control of the narrative she saw slipping through her fingers like sand. "Wow!" she shrieked, her voice pitched an octave too high. "Isn't that amazing? They really committed to the bit. Who knew they had language tapes in the break room at the warehouse?" She looked around, begging her friends to join in, to laugh, to dismiss our competence as a parlor trick. But nobody was laughing. Especially not Mr. Dupont. The CEO of the French luxury conglomerate stood up. He did not look at the bride. He did not look at my son. He pushed his chair back with a scrape of wood against wood and walked straight past the head table. He walked right up to Mark. "Mark," Mr. Dupont said, extending his hand. I had no idea. When my assistant said the wedding was for a brand in sterling, I did not make the connection. I assumed it was a common name. Mark shook his hand firmly. "It is good to see you, Henri." "Resolved?" Dupont laughed. "You saved us 3 million euros in tariff delays. My logistics director sings your praises every Monday morning." Courtney froze. She glanced at her boss, the man whose approval she had been chasing for 2 years, and then shifted her gaze to her father-in-law, the man she had mocked for reading a menu. The color drained from her face so completely she looked like a wax figure. I watched the realization hit her. It is a concept we in the business world call the paper tiger reality. Courtney was a paper tiger. Her power was painted on. It was made of job titles, leased cars, and the approval of people like Mr. Dupont. She was terrifying only if you believed the paint was real skin. But Mark? Mark was the ground she stood on. Her entire career in fashion PR relied on moving products from Europe to America. And my husband owned the ships, the trucks, and the contracts that moved them. She was standing there realizing that while she was busy trying to get us kicked out of the VIP section, we were the ones who built the club. But we weren't done. From the back of the room, the vineyard manager appeared. He was a solemn man named Julian, who took his job very seriously. He was cradling a bottle of wine in his arms like it was an infant. It was covered in gray dust and cobwebs. He walked with purpose toward the head table. Courtney saw him coming and straightened her spine, seemingly thinking this was a peace offering. A special bottle for the bride to smooth over the awkwardness. She reached out her hand to accept it. Julian walked right past her outstretched hand. He didn't even blink. He stopped in front of me. "Madam," Julian said, bowing slightly. "I took the liberty of retrieving this from the private cellar. It is the 1945 vintage. The previous owner asked me to present it to you upon your arrival." Courtney's hand was still hovering in the air, grasping at nothing. "Excuse me?" she snapped. "Julian, I didn't order that. And why are you giving it to her?" Julian turned to her slowly. His expression was polite, but his eyes were cold. "I am not giving it to a guest. Mrs. Sterling, I am presenting it to the owners." He turned back to Mark and me. The deed transfer was finalized at 9 o'clock this morning. The wire transfer cleared an hour ago. Welcome to the chateau. Madam, the estate and the cellar are yours. I looked at Courtney. She was trembling. She looked at the walls of the chateau, the high stone arches, the velvet drapes, the crystal chandeliers she had spent months bragging about on Instagram. She realized in that second that she wasn't the queen of the castle. She was a squatter. She had spent the entire weekend trying to make us feel like we didn't belong in her world. She didn't realize that she was standing in ours. This, she whispered, her voice shaking. You bought the venue? We didn't buy it for the wedding, Courtney, I said, my voice calm and factual. Mark has been eyeing this property for an investment portfolio for 6 months. The wedding just made the timing convenient. I placed my hand on the bottle of 1945 wine. It was cold and heavy. It appears there has been a misunderstanding about who is hosting whom. Courtney looked at the bottle of vintage wine, then at Mr. DuPont, and finally at the deed in Julian's hands. Her survival instinct kicked in. It was frantic and ugly. She rushed around the table, her heavy gown knocking over a crystal water glass that shattered on the floor. She grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. Mom! Dad, she stammered, her eyes darting around the room to see who was watching. Why didn't you tell me? We are family. We could have used this. Think of the press. We can do a photo shoot in the vineyards tomorrow. She turned to Mr. DuPont, laughing nervously. See, Henri, I told you my in-laws were full of surprises. We are all just playing a game. I looked down at her hand on my arm. Then I looked at my son. Brandon was sitting very still. He was looking at his wife as if he was seeing a stranger for the first time. The fog of love was lifting, replaced by the harsh clarity of who she actually was. She was not just ambitious. She was a fraud who would sell his parents down the river for a pat on the head from a boss and then beg for their money the second she got caught. Brandon stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He simply reached out and peeled Courtney's fingers off my arm. Brandon, she whispered. I think that is enough, Courtney, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a final verdict. He stepped back from her, creating a physical distance that felt like a canyon. I turned to the room. I picked up the microphone one last time. I believe honesty is the foundation of both business and family, I said, my voice steady. Courtney has made it very clear this weekend that she finds our presence to be a burden. She is ashamed of our lack of formal education. She feels we lowered the property value of her life. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I think it is only fair we stop burdening her. I turned to Julian, our new vineyard manager. Please ensure the bride and her party vacate the premises by midnight. The owners require the space for a private business meeting tomorrow morning. Security will be at the gate to ensure the transition is smooth. I set the microphone back on the stand. It clicked with a sound like a gavel hitting a judge's bench. Mark and I did not stay for the cake. We walked out of the ballroom, past the stunned silence of the high society guests, and into the cool night air of the Napa Valley. The valet was waiting for us. We had not driven the beat-up truck we usually use to visit family, the one we drove to keep Courtney from feeling insecure about her own leased vehicle. Tonight, the valet pulled up in our black sedan, a car that cost more than Courtney's entire college tuition. We got in. The leather was cool and smelled of success. As Mark started the engine, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Brandon. He was at a hotel. He said he was sorry. He said he was done. We drove down the winding road, the headlights cutting through the darkness of the vineyard rows that now belonged to us. I rolled down the window. The air was crisp and clean. I reached into my purse and pulled out the crumpled piece of paper, the phonetic gibberish Courtney had written out to humiliate us. I looked at it one last time. It was a symbol of everything she thought we were. Small, stupid, powerless. I tore it in half, then in half again. I held the confetti out the window and opened my hand. The wind caught the pieces, scattering them into the night, disappearing into the dark soil of our land. She wanted us to be speechless. In the end, she was the one with nothing left to say. If you believe character counts more than a diploma, share this video. And tell me in the comments, would you have evicted her or let her stay for the party?